When was the last time you felt anger flare up, and what was the cause? Perhaps it was a barbed comment from your boss, a careless driver who forced you to slam on your brakes, or something in your newsfeed that boiled your blood. Anger is as old as the hills, and most of us wrestle with it at some point every day. And yet 2,500 years ago, a man sitting beneath a tree had an insight that could utterly transform moments like this for us. The Buddha said that clinging to rage is like grabbing hold of a scorching coal, intending to throw it at your enemy. You may or may not hit him, but you can guarantee that you'll be walking away with burns. He wasn't just doling out pithy advice. He was pointing to a deep truth about how our minds and reality operate. Anger is a punishment we inflict on ourselves when the world fails to live up to our expectations. Modern neuroscience validates this ancient wisdom with startling precision. When anger surges through our system, stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood our bloodstream, elevating blood pressure and suppressing immune function. The amygdala, our brain's alarm system, hijacks rational thought, while the prefrontal cortex goes temporarily offline. We're literally less intelligent when we're angry, operating from what neuroscientist Daniel Goleman calls amygdala hijack. Think of your inner life as a garden you've tended for years, wisdom, compassion, serenity all sprouting under careful care. Anger wields an axe. A single outburst can level decades of growth. Those neural pathways you've carved through years of patience and self-discipline can be scorched in moments of unchecked fury. Buddha was a student of inner cartography, tracing the meander and looping logic of human afflictions with the precision of a master surveyor. Anger for him was a terrain to be mapped. If you follow his footsteps, you'll find a record not just of how anger erupts, but how it flows through the body, how it roars in your temples and curls cold around your heart, and what it leaves behind after it finally gutters out. The physiology of anger follows predictable patterns. It begins with a trigger, often something that threatens our sense of control, fairness, or self-worth. Within milliseconds, our nervous system launches into action. Heart rate spikes, muscles tense, breathing becomes shallow. Blood diverts from digestive organs to major muscle groups, preparing us for fight or flight. This cascade happens so quickly that we often find ourselves in the grip of fury before conscious awareness catches up. Picture this: a midday sun so hot you could fry naan bread on a slate stone, a courtyard bustling with gossip and temple bells. Enter an eminent Brahman, moustache waxed to needle points, robes starched into geometry, seething because the locals were flocking to Buddha's teachings instead of his own Vedic recitations. The Brahman stalked up to Buddha and began unloading. Insults hot as chilies. People expected fireworks or at least a lively retort from the philosopher monk. Instead, Buddha returned his stare in complete composure, eyes unblinking as glass. When the Brahman finally exhausted his arsenal, Buddha replied with serene curiosity, "If someone brings a dish to your table and you refuse it, who then owns that meal?" The Brahman blinked, temporarily derailed by this gastronomic riddle, then replied somewhat defensively, "The giver does, I suppose." Buddha nodded. "Just so," he said softly enough that everyone had to lean in. "You have offered me your anger today, but I do not accept it. Therefore, my friend, please feel free to take it with you when you depart." The moment became legend because it showed how invulnerability isn't about armoring up against every affront. Sometimes it's about declining delivery altogether. When someone provokes us, we can become hijacked by ingrained reactions, automatic neural programs launching before we realize what is happening, like a swimmer mistaking a shoal of fish for the looming figure of a shark. We are hardwired to assume the worst, and we lash out as if our life depends on it. We can always apologize later if we've overreacted. Mindfulness, though, creates a brief pause between stimulus and response, granting us the freedom to choose how to respond. It allows us to respond, to become response-able. This pause need not be long. Even 3 conscious breaths can shift us from reaction to response. The practice begins with recognition. Can you catch anger in its earlier stages? Notice the physical sensations, the tightening in your chest, the heat rising in your face, the clenching of your jaw. These bodily signals are like early warning systems, offering precious seconds to intervene before the emotional storm fully develops. Buddhist teachings speak of a double victory. When we don't return anger for anger, both parties have the opportunity to heal. Practically speaking, a compassionate reply to rage often diffuses conflict. The other person feels heard, the storm subsides. This isn't weakness, it's rootedness, being a mountain rather than a leaf blown by every emotional gust. Consider how conflict typically escalates. Anger meets anger, creating a feedback loop that amplifies hostility. Each harsh word justifies the next. Each attack validates retaliation. But when one person chooses differently, responding with curiosity instead of defensiveness, empathy instead of attack, the entire dynamic shifts. The aggressor's energy, having nothing to push against, often dissipates naturally. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or failing to set boundaries. Rather, it means responding from clarity rather than reactivity, from strength rather than wounded pride. Perhaps the most profound teaching comes from a story about a monk seeking perfect meditation conditions. He walks far from the bustling city where his temple is located and finally finds a secluded lake to begin his practice. Just minutes have passed when he is interrupted by another boat crashing into his. Furious, he's ready to confront the inconsiderate boater until he realizes the boat is empty, simply drifting with the wind. In that moment, the monk has a profound realization. His anger wasn't really about the boat or even about being interrupted. It was about the story he created, about someone deliberately disturbing his peace, about disrespect, about his meditation being more important than the circumstances unfolding around him. The empty boat reveals that our anger almost always comes from the stories we construct, not from the actual events themselves. We're constantly telling ourselves tales about people's motivations, about what their actions mean, about how we're being mistreated. That driver who cut you off wasn't necessarily being malicious. Perhaps they're rushing to a hospital emergency, distracted by devastating news, or simply didn't see you. Your boss's comment might have been a misplaced attempt at office banter. What might happen if we extended others the benefit of the doubt? What if we loosened our grip on our righteous indignation? Psychologist Carl Jung observed that what enrages us in others often reveals unacknowledged parts of ourselves. That overbearing colleague? Maybe they're channeling assertiveness you've suppressed. The selfish friend? Perhaps they're expressing self-care you've denied yourself. We project our disowned qualities onto the world, then rail against them rather than looking to the source of our outrage. This insight transforms every irritation into an opportunity for self-discovery. When someone triggers intense anger, ask yourself, what quality in them am I rejecting in myself? What aspect of my own nature am I trying to disown? The person who annoys you most might be your greatest teacher, showing you precisely what you need to integrate within yourself. Buddhism teaches shunyata, or emptiness. Nothing exists independently with a fixed essence. Both the angry person and their target are simply temporary confluences of causes and conditions. The terrible boss is shaped by their own pressures, fears, and conditioning. The inconsiderate driver is a complex being, dealing with circumstances you know nothing about. When you come to see that there's no permanent other attacking you, only shifting circumstances, temporary formations of thoughts and emotions, anger loosens its grip. This doesn't diminish the reality of harmful behavior or negate the need for boundaries, but it frees you from taking everything personally. You can even turn anger into an ally. Each flare-up invites you to ask, what story am I narrating? What am I projecting? Which part of myself needs acknowledgement? In this way, the person who triggers you becomes a mirror, highlighting your inner work. Anger, properly channeled, becomes energy for positive change. The fury at injustice can fuel advocacy for the marginalized. Anger at environmental destruction can motivate conservation efforts. The key is learning to harness anger's power without being consumed by its heat. When anger arises, try this practice. First, breathe. Notice the physical sensations without trying to change them. Ask yourself, What story am I telling about this situation? Then consider alternative narratives. Could there be other explanations for what happened? What would compassion look like in this moment? The Buddha's message isn't to suppress or deny anger. It's to wake up so fully that we respond from insight rather than from old wounds. In a world full of empty boats, real power lies in navigating the currents of our own consciousness, choosing not to drift but to chart our own course toward wisdom, compassion, and genuine peace.